I hope you're ready to discuss the deepest, darkest corners of the internet with me. I'm Giada Santana. I'm a journalist and a communication professional, and I'm here with James Bloodworth. You're a journalist and author published by The Times, Guardian, New York Review of Books, and you're the author of The Myth of Meritocracy, Hired 6 Months in Low-Wage Britain, but also the author of This, Lost Boys Undercover in the Manosphere, which we'll be mainly discussing today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
And I really want to get to the book. I was reading it even before we knew you were coming, so it's very exciting to have you here. I want to get to your personal experience, to your analysis of the movement, how it morphs, and what it says about the fabric of our society. But before we get to all that, I think we're still digesting the caffeine. I wanted to ask you to draw from this, if you want to take it, and
Shake.
Yes. We have put in here a few words that are drawn from your book and that come from language that the Manosphere uses. Maybe you can take one or two, depending on how good. What is it?
Status maxes.
Oh, I quite like.
Status maxes.
I quite like that one. How many people here know what status maxers are? Very good. We have one. Yes, exactly. What are status maxers, and what does that say about the concept of masculinity that is promoted by the Manosphere?
So status maxes are, like the Manosphere, first of all, is a group of anti-feminist subcultures, mainly on the internet, but some of it's also offline as well. So there are programs run by people like Andrew Tate. You may have heard of the War Room. Pickup artists run their kind of boot camps in cities around the world, like every weekend. And status maxers are a subset of that community, a subsect, you might say, of men who think that all women care about is status. So they believe that they will never, if they're low status, if they don't embody certain characteristics, which tend to be being rich, being 6 foot, having a chiseled jawline, and also being, having kind of certain status objects which go with being a successful capitalist, like fast cars or a big house or whatever, then women will not be interested in them because women are superficial and hypergamous, is the word they use, and fickle. So status maxers are men who see themselves as existing kind of at the bottom of a status hierarchy of men, but they console themselves with the fact that they're above women. That's their kind of view, and similar with incels, and those communities often kind of overlap.
Thank you for that. Status maxers is one of many terms that are specific to the Manosphere, and I quite like looking on Reddit sometimes at this group because of the very specific cryptic humor that they have, tone, and way of communicating. There's a strategy to it, which is to say certain things so that they go off the radar, right? They're not checked by fact checkers. They're not obvious to people that are outside these sort of spaces. Can you tell us more about that and how that constitutes a sort of laboratory for radicalization?
Yeah, so I mean, the Manosphere generally, they initially congregated on platforms like Reddit, although many of those platforms were, their own forums were banned over time for misogyny or advocating violence. But 4chan was another place, and also they have their own websites, different groups within the Manosphere. And so aside from the websites, I mean, during my book investigation, I attended some programs embedded myself on some masculinity boot camps in America. One of them was called the Men of Action program. So it's about going from being an invisible surplus man, as they would call it, to being like a high status alpha male. And I mean, part of that was creating this kind of locker room experience for men who came from a background where they were very much on the internet all the time, didn't have a lot of in-person socialization, didn't have a lot of kind of disposable income often, or sometimes they did and spent it on these courses. And just kind of, it tied into kind of that loss of like third spaces where they didn't feel like they had those socialization, those institutions they were socialized from that many of us did in the past. And they found kind of this brotherhood through the Manosphere of like meeting other men and having this locker room experience, but that the point of kind of collaboration was like diminishing women very often. Like women were the thing they bonded over, and that can be a harmless thing. That can be a harmless thing when it comes to kind of men talking with each other about kind of conversation starters in a bar or something. Like I saw that kind of stuff, which was to my mind like relatively harmless, about kind of how to be more outgoing, how to be more assertive. But a lot of the bonding was about diminishing women and making you and bonding over that kind of deriving status from your disparagement of women as well. And so it started off online, but it often kind of spilled offline as well.
Mm-hmm. Indeed. Correct me if I'm wrong, you started in 2018 working on this. You go to many conferences, events. You spend a lot of time in person with members of the Manosphere. What type of people attend these conferences, and how expensive is this type of workshop? Because I think it's really important to underline how these communities, yes, like this is community building, this gives a sense of belonging, this is an industry, right?
Yeah, I mean that's the most important thing in some ways, to understand that the Manosphere is like a sales funnel, really. So it's not just people kind of benevolently or otherwise deciding that they want to give men advice to help men. It's a profit-driven industry. And when we look at radicalization, we often think correctly, in my view, radicalization often begins by being parasitic on an insecurity. So it can find someone in a low moment and then kind of capitalize on that. So Julia Ebner, who's an anti-extremism researcher, academic in the UK, she did a book on radicalization on the internet called Going Dark, on incels, and also trad wives. And she told me how, during a period of her research, she was at a really low, vulnerable point. And she said that she could see herself almost being radicalized into these gender certainties, this trad wife stuff, because it gave this very simple answer, this very kind of black and white answer to problems which can be quite seductive if you're going through a period of turmoil in your life. And so radicalization often happens with, it kind of is parasitic on that insecurity and kind of finds you in that moment, but it creates the insecurity as well. So it's not just about kind of finding people who are already feeling insecure. It also creates the insecurity and then creates the market for its products by making you feel insecure. So you will see figures like Andrew Tate, perhaps the most notorious of the internet misogynists, who will like berate the audience like a drill sergeant, who will say, you're nothing, men will never respect you, women will never be interested in you. And then they present themselves as saviors and guides who are going to fix you if you only sign up to their course for $49.99 a month, etc. And social media has also really amplified this sales funnel. So in the past, you'd have figures like this who would be selling their kind of magic beans or their get-rich-quick schemes through in the back pages of men's magazines or porno magazines or whatever. But now, and it wouldn't connect with a lot of people, but social media allows them to like bamboozle their audience of typically teenage boys with charisma, with like that conviction multiplier of conviction, speaking with conviction, and also the lifestyle. So presenting this narrative against a backdrop of like the 13-year-old boy fantasy of like fast cars, huge houses, and the most important status symbol of all in that world, which is women in bikinis and whatever. And saying, I have this, why haven't you got this? And the way to get this is to buy my course, and then you can be just like me. And there's also kind of an ideological undercurrent to that as well, where they push the idea that society has changed because of feminism and the sexual revolution, and we have this thing called the 80-20 rule, where women are no longer interested in most men, and they're no longer going to get married to you, they're only interested in the top 20% of men, and that's also part of the sales funnel. So, buy my course or you're going to be one of the surplus men who's invisible to women.
Right. A lot I want to say there. I'm going to talk about social media first, because I think this is crucial to this conversation. The role of YouTube, Reddit, and other platforms, and the internet in general is really pivotal to the spreading of this sort of narrative. You have some data, some figures in your book that are really interesting. How does the algorithm work for young boys and men, and how does this luring in sort of function online?
Yeah, I mean, the algorithm is, obviously there's much that's talked about the algorithm in terms of, so the first kind of couple of weeks I started working on the book, within that time, my YouTube feed was like colonized by like Jordan Peterson type videos and stuff. Once you start to watch a few, like fitness videos sometimes, then, you know, before long you're having men talk about how men aren't strong anymore, and this is the fault of women and feminism, and then it becomes also anti-LGBT, so you'll have these masculinity influencers saying that, you know, things started to go wrong for men because of feminism, and LGBT stuff like piggybacked on the back of feminism, and it all goes back to women being the problem. And yeah, I mean, the algorithm's part of it. I think it's also just like how we navigate the algorithm is like our understanding of it is often very naive, and I think that's true of younger people especially, but also adults. You know, we have, with kind of mainstream television in the UK, and also just advertising in like the Tube or something, the London Underground, there is a conversation, there is an understanding that, you know, we don't want to advertise to children. We don't allow like junk food adverts to children. We don't allow like cigarette adverts to children. I was going to say gambling, but gambling adverts are kind of everywhere, have kind of taken over the UK. But you kind of have these figures online who present this kind of themselves as content creators. They present it as content. We benignly give it the benign label of content, when really it's a form of advertising. And there's not really any form of socialization sometimes that can counteract that. So it's all very well us talking about like role models, like our teacher at school or our dad or something. But I think it can be hard even for the best parents or the best kind of teachers to compete with this kind of imagery, this fantastic imagery that people see online of these lifestyles people are apparently leading. And I think that's the problem we're kind of grappling with at the moment. And the algorithm, there is just this kind of, it feeds you more and more extreme content because the interests of the tech companies are keeping you online as much as possible. And sensationalism and bad news and also conspiracy theories about, you know, different groups of people being against you, that can keep you online, which allows them to sell advertising space.
And I'm interested in knowing more about how you found out about the Manosphere first. Your book is about mainly your undercover work, but it begins with a personal experience. It begins with you genuinely looking for advice on how to date women. I don't know about that. But I was interested in that. Did you read about it? Did you find it online? And how was it to go to that first sort of workshop?
Yeah, so I mean, the book starts 20 years ago this year with so actually 21 years ago I came back. I was at college and I was very socially awkward when I was younger. And was brought up by my grandmother, who was amazing, and I never had a dad growing up, and my family was a bit dysfunctional, and I was always kind of a bit ashamed of my masculinity. I was always like. Even being assertive at all, I associated things which are just normal with being like overly masculine and toxic and stuff. And so I kind of didn't know how to bridge the gap between, I wasn't a very social person, I stayed in a lot, read a lot, I had my group of friends. And then one day I was at college and I was interested in this girl, but I didn't know how to talk to her. I thought she liked me as well, I still think that, but I didn't know how to talk to her. And so one day I went home and went back to my grand's house in the countryside, and I typed into, it wasn't Google, it was like Ask Jeeves or something back then.
What is that?
Yeah, I'm dating myself by saying that. It was, I typed in, you know, how to ask a woman out, how to ask a girl out. And I stumbled across this forum where these men purported to have all the answers. And, you know, if I just listened to them, if I just followed this step-by-step process, I too could get the woman of my dreams. I think that was the sales pitch. And yeah, I mean, I guess I didn't know any better. I guess I was willing to overlook the misogyny. It was the pickup artists, you know. Neil Strauss's book, The Game, had recently come out. And
maybe it'd be good to talk about what pickup culture is, if not everybody is.
Yeah, sure. It was so in 2005, this American journalist Neil Strauss brought out a book called The Game, which was undercover in the secret society of pickup artists, and it was ostensibly an undercover book of journalism, but it was actually a very sympathetic account of these men in the United States who claimed to have all the answers when it came to meeting and attracting women, sleeping with women. It was basically a very manipulative idea that men and women were different, and if you just follow this step-by-step process, any woman will sleep with you or something. Or you just follow these, you imbibe these scripts, and you go out to a bar or a nightclub and practice them, and you'll be able to get a girlfriend, you will be able to get the woman of your dreams, you know, whatever your goals are. And I thought, oh, this sounds interesting. Maybe some of these lines can help me in college or whatever. And I don't think I was any more of I think I was a sexist, but I don't think I was any more of a sexist than society in general in the year 2006. I mean, I don't think I was particularly exceptional in that respect. I just think I was willing to overlook the misogynistic, manipulative aspect of that subculture, because I was like, well, I'm just going to take the bits of it. I'm going to use these like conversation starters in college or whatever, and then ignore the rest. And this culminated in me going on a pickup artist boot camp in London 20 years ago next month, in fact. And yeah, it was like I had a car accident before. Someone had crashed into me a few months before, so I had whiplash, and I had a compensation payout. So I had £10,000 to burn, and I burned 2,000 of it on this boot camp that promised to fix all my problems. So that was my brief encounter with the Manosphere, and you can read about it in the book.
2 questions for you. First of all, did you talk to the girl you liked? And second, what did you wear to the boot camp?
What did I wear? Which one do you want to know first?
The girl, clearly.
Yeah, we did actually get together in the end, but it wasn't because of any of the pickup stuff. It was just kind of we got to know each other more, started hanging out more, and then and we're still friends. In fact, we ended up getting together. The boot camp, I mean. I understand, there were some aspects of it that were, useful, and it's like, that seems kind of, why the hell would I say that now when I've written a book about how bad the Manosphere is? But it was there was 20% of it was, you need to put yourself out there. You need
Exposure,
to go, you need to go out there, it's okay to be sociable, it's okay to go talk to someone, and, you should respect, if they're not interested, that's fine, you should respect that. But I was just not putting myself out there at all. And I just believed these kind of fairy tales that, it'll just figure itself out for you eventually. But then, obviously, that came, the 80% of that there was this very kind of essentialist view of women. And it is this idea that, if you press these buttons, if you say these things, a human being who's an individual, but in this case, they're not treated as an individual, will respond in this way, which is obviously not true. And yeah, the deeper, I spent a few months reading the forums and then came away with the idea that, actually you don't need to do this. I just need to put myself out there a bit more. And then I kind of forgot about it and didn't tell anyone about it and kept it a secret for 20 years until I started to write the book. And it's I need to fess up now.
I think it's really important, though, to make a distinction between what the Manosphere was then and what the Manosphere is now. I think a lot of people have this understanding of Andrew Tate or Jordan Peterson, but maybe they don't really know what has happened since. You talk about it extensively in the book, how this transformation really also is about the role that women have around this philosophy, this movement. They go from being, the main goal, right? If you do this, you will get women, to women not really being the point anymore, just being reduced to a commodity. So what is the Manosphere 2.0 like?
Yeah, I mean, that's an important point. So, I mean, I don't want to downplay how bad it was. There was always this, and I tell this story in the book, there was always this misogynistic current that runs through the Manosphere, all the way back from when it kind of started off in the 70s and 80s, all the way through Neil Strauss's stuff, all the way to today. There's always this kind of misogynistic current to it. But the Manosphere kind of I discovered through The pickup artists, I mean, there's at least, I sort of understand it, like where some of the guys who were attracted to that movement, myself included, were coming from. Because it was a case of, we need to make ourselves more attractive to women in order to, some of the men I interviewed who got into that subculture, they wanted just to have a girlfriend. They wanted to meet someone and settle down eventually. They wanted a few conversation starters, a few what do I say to someone? How do I get a date? How do I set my profile up on a dating app or something? Which, I don't see anything inherently problematic about that. I can comprehend where you're coming from. I can comprehend what you're looking for. Whereas the Manosphere today, it's not really about they're not really trying to turn themselves into objects of kind of female desire anymore. It's more about the male gaze. It's more about kind of status flexing for other men. It's not about meeting someone, having a connection, and enjoying that person, enjoying that kind of development of any kind of relationship, whether it's short term or long term. Which again, I understand what you're getting at if that's your goal. Now it's about kind of the other human being as a status object, as something you can flex on social media to impress other men, as a sign of your status in kind of the hierarchy. And it's even more dehumanizing in a way, because it's not even about any kind of sexual gratification. It's about this gratification of being kind of this good capitalist subject and presenting your life on social media typically as successful, and through the prism, everything is seen through the prism of getting rich and being successful within this kind of very narrow context of what success is. Having a certain type of woman on your arm, having a certain type of car, living in a certain type of place, looking a certain type of way, for men as well as women. I mean, women have had to put up that with that pressure to look a certain way for a long time, but the expansion of the market in terms of the Manosphere is making men feel insecure, like they're not enough unless they look a certain way as well. That's the kind of perversion of equality we've kind of arrived at with this kind of marketization through the Manosphere.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested in talking a bit more about 2016 and why that's a pivotal year for the movement. The movement now is a lot more brutal, authoritarian. It's connected to the spreading of conspiracy theories and undemocratic values, and that because really it spills into politics, right? American as European politics, and we'll focus more later on extreme movements. But I think there's a big elephant in the room, which is Donald Trump. How does his figure play into all of this and the morphing of the Manosphere?
So around 2015 actually, you see, so the Red Pill subreddit was a big place where there was kind of like the pickup artist Reddit. There was like a seduction Reddit, it was called. I think that's even still going, or it might have been quarantined by Reddit. Wouldn't surprise me. And then there was this new kind of Red Pill subreddit set up around 2015, and it was set up by a Republican member of the Republican Party, like an activist in the US. And it kind of started as like a breakaway from the pickup artist forums, because they said that, the pickup guys were too kind of metrosexual and pandering to women too much, and too much about self-improvement and this stuff. And they were much more, it was much more hard-edged, and, we need to get involved in politics because they talk much more openly about feminism is the problem. And whereas that was an undercurrent of the pickup artist community, to some extent, like they would talk about how men weren't dominant enough anymore and how men weren't masculine enough anymore. I didn't really hear much in the way of men talking about, it wasn't really political like overtly, like you didn't hear much overt like anti-feminism. It was like, politics is something other people do. And the Red Pill movement in 2014-15 is when it starts to become much more political, and that kind of aligns with Donald Trump announcing that he's going to run for the presidency. And the fact he was also running against Hillary Clinton, or would be running against Hillary Clinton, was a big part of that kind of narrative on the Red Pill forums, that she was this someone who self-proclaimed feminist, She said she was a feminist. There were many of her supporters would say that she would be the first female president. And Donald Trump, in contrast, presented himself as this kind of cartoonish, alpha. He was their idea of what an alpha male looked like, their idea of what a high status man looked like, and he still is. And it's this cartoonish version of masculinity that they believe in as well, where you kind of, even if you're just meeting someone, you've always got to be dominating them. Even you're just shaking hands with someone, you can see it if you watch him on film. Even if he's just shaking hands with someone, he has to always be controlling the frame and dominating them with the handshake. And another leader like that is Vladimir Putin as well. So it's very much this view of society where Putin dominates those below him, and if you're below him, you can dominate people below you. And which is also why there's a lot of admiration for Putin in the Manosphere as well. You have there are men in the Manosphere who've gone to fight for Russia against Ukraine and died in the process. A guy called Coach Red Pill, a Chilean-American guy, that happened too. And also Putin was someone who partially decriminalized domestic violence in Russia, because it's, again, this narrative that, he may only bring the citizenry of Russia poverty and war, but at least in your home you can feel like a feudal lord. You can have status in your own kind of realm, by dominating those around you. And I'm not saying Trump is as bad as Putin yet, but the Manosphere is attracted to Putin for those reasons, because attracted to Trump for those reasons because it sees him as someone who will kind of deliver to white men typically what's rightfully theirs that they feel like they've lost. And Steve Bannon, Trump's kind of right-hand man during the start of his first term, has openly talked about kind of leveraging that resentful, loser energy from platforms like 4chan and channeling that into a political movement of these kind of disenfranchised white men who feel like they've lost status because they're no longer dominating women, people of color. And you see this through Gamergate. If those of you who are familiar with Gamergate from 2014, there was this drive to get more people of color, more disabled people into gaming, more representation in computer gaming. And it sparked this kind of backlash of angry white men on the internet who didn't want to give away any space that they occupied to other people. And that's partly, I think, that's in microcosm what the Trump movement is in some ways. We can obviously talk about there are all kind of material factors behind it, and not everyone's just kind of a bigot who votes Trump, but there is this kind of narrative, especially on the podcast circuit, of men who feel like they're losing space to other groups in society and they need to kind of reclaim it.
And indeed, this resentment brews into anger, and we see how language and violence are intertwined. The brutalization of language leads to more violence. And so I'm interested in talking about how the Manosphere is related to offline events, violent events. How does that happen? Does the Manosphere create the moral permission to be violent, or is it a sort of philosophy of violence per se? How do you see it?
Okay, I just want to say something about the language really quickly. I find it interesting that the Manosphere, they will talk about the sexual marketplace, and they will talk about the dating economy, and they will talk about one's own sexual market value. Everything is presented in kind of the terms of the market, and you're a kind of product, and you have to market yourself correctly. Otherwise, you'll be kind of left on the shelf by other consumers. So it's very much channeling the idea of romance and channeling the idea of love through reducing it to consumerism, reducing it to this market where if you don't market yourself correctly, you will never find love. So reducing this very basic human instinct to the kind of diktats of the market, which I find that very interesting to start with, because that to me is not, when I first started to hear that stuff, it's this is an ideology. They would say that they're reverting to something naturalistic, and they espouse these tenets from evolution, so-called. They will, they believe they will give this veneer of evolutionary psychology to some of the things they're espousing, but really it's kind of the Manosphere in that sense represents the suffusion of market logic into every aspect of human affairs. So that's interesting. First of all, in terms of how violence spills offline, I don't know if any of you have seen like Adolescence, the series. I mean, it was like hugely popular, so I guess a lot of people will have. Which, you know, is a series that was on Netflix in April last year, and it's a story about a 13-year-old boy, I think he's 13, who murders someone from his school, a young girl from his school, because he's apparently been consuming kind of manosphere content online. And I cover some examples of that in my book of these kind of instances of like apocalyptic violence, of mass shootings, of several shooting sprees by people who are ostensibly kind of marinated in the doctrines of the manosphere. And that can happen. I mean, those examples, I mean, when that tends to happen, it tends to be someone who has a mental health crisis, but that shouldn't detract from the fact that they have been swimming in these ideological waters, and had they not been, it probably wouldn't have manifested in that way. So when I say like mental health crisis, I don't want to like absolve them of what they did and absolve the ideology that's at play. But it's still relatively rare, those acts of extreme violence. I think the manosphere is like the more kind of problematic thing, as it were, would be the fact that the way this creeps into relationships, the way this creeps into coercive, the way this kind of manifests in coercive behavior within relationships is more subtle than, you know, if we're saying what's the impact of manosphere violence, manosphere ideology, it's not going to be, in the most part, these kind of outbreaks of violence you see on the news, or someone going on a shooting spree. Yeah, that does happen, but it's relatively rare. It's more that it influences men, and that kind of toxic behavior then creeps into people's personal relationships. And so we had a poll last year in the UK, which an Ipsos poll, big respectable polling company, which found that I think it was 53% of Gen Z men believe that the 80-20 rule is real, believe that women are only interested in high-status men. 51% of Gen Z men, in a different survey, also thought that feminism had gone too far, and that men were now the ones who were, white, straight men were now the ones who were suffering, as it were, who were now oppressed. And these are the manosphere narratives. So the danger for me is how these things seep from the manosphere into the mainstream. And it's not kind of just looking for some kind of mass shooting or some horrific crime. Is like you're looking in the wrong place in some way. It's how this stuff creeps into relationships, how this creeps into behaviors that, with men telling women what they should wear, who they can be friends with, and just these controlling behaviors, if you like. I think that's the kind of danger of it. That's the main danger of it, if you like.
And in the book, you talk about a dangerous vacuum in society and in politics that boys and men face, and how that's related, right, to them falling into the manosphere. So how do we get out of this? Let's look briefly at solutions. I think we don't have that much time left. I see Federica's looking at me. But briefly, you spent a lot of time with people that are deep into this environment. How do we get them out of it?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously different for different people, but I mean, I do resonate with some of the talks that happened earlier about like deconstructing masculinity. Like there isn't this like clear demarcation between like the manosphere as these bad men, and then there's like the good men over here. There is that cross-pollination where a lot of the women who've been through domestic violence is not necessarily some guy who's like watching Andrew Tate videos constantly. It's someone who thinks sometimes that they've got to perform this certain version of masculinity, that their ego is attached to this certain version of masculinity, that their identity is attached to these kind of modes of behavior. And that's counterposed to things like being vulnerable. You can't be vulnerable. You always have to kind of hold frame, as the manosphere guys would put it. You always have to be dominating people around you. You can't kind of, and men kind of impose that on each other. You can't be vulnerable, or other men will belittle you, and that will see you as like lower down in the status hierarchy. And you see people like Jordan Peterson kind of constantly normalizing this stuff. I think for some men came out of it. Some of the men I spoke to would come out of it organically through things like having female friends, through having a relationship and realizing that listening to some program called like alpha male dating systems isn't actually helpful in a relationship, that you have to be vulnerable in a relationship, you have to open up, you have to compromise, you have to see the other person not as this two-dimensional being that you've kind of learned about from a script on the internet, but as another human being who has experiences and feelings just like yourself. That's not, not a radically different. The men and women aren't like radically different, we're more or less the same. Sometimes that can be organic because you learn that through experience. Sometimes it can happen through having a male role model or a female role model who you respect, who takes you aside and says, you're barking up the wrong tree with this. These aren't kind of people who just want to kind of show you they don't want to teach you. They're trying to sell you a product. They're trying to dip their hand in your pocket and take your money to sell these courses. They don't have they're not trying to help you. And also,
I'm interested in, has your book had any impact on the people that you had talked to? Do the people that you had interviewed or that you were undercover with know about this book, and what type of impact that has had?
Yeah, I mean, it's some of them. Yeah, I mean, everyone who's in the book pretty much, knows about it, unless people I've just lost contact with, which happens because it took me a few years to write the book. But yeah, I mean, it has influenced some people because I've met with them after and had a drink with them and kind of told them what I think about the Manosphere as my own thinking's evolved about it. Because, when I started the book, I knew what I thought about it. I didn't like this world, but then I hope at least my thinking is more sophisticated about it today, partly through interaction with different audiences and coming across like different perspectives. But that was also why I put the bit in the start, the first part of the book is me being vulnerable and me saying that, I was susceptible to this stuff as well. I don't claim to be like above it. I don't claim to be like the perfect feminist or something. Or, for me, it's also been a process of learning and trying to kind of, talk about where I went down the wrong path and stuff. And I think sometimes when, like if I'd found that when I was younger, someone who I can kind of meet them halfway and then the narrator then takes me through the journey of the Manosphere and I kind of walk alongside them. That was what I tried to do with the book a bit. So I meet them halfway and then they come with me and we see where this leads eventually, and then maybe they will also say, this isn't for me either.
Thank you. I'm going to now open the floor to questions. Questions end with a question mark. All remarks and comments we can leave for the refreshments. Thank you very much. I see one there.
Thanks for that, James. My name's Ben. I write the newsletter Everything in Moderation, about content moderation. I'm interested in your thoughts about the kind of proliferation of dating websites and apps. They've been around since the kind of start of the internet. They've become very kind of prominent over the last 15 years, say. To what extent have they kind of crystallized the idea of men and women in a marketplace and the idea that you have to kind of put your best photos at the front and answer questions in a particular way? And how have those platforms and policies kind of added to what you've seen?
Yeah, that's a good question, because that has had a big impact as far as I can see on the growth of the Manosphere. And we can talk about also dating apps as a symptom in some ways rather than a cause. Like they're a symptom of the decline of like third spaces, the decline of public spaces. In the UK at least, the lack of disposable income. So whereas 20 years ago, I feel so old now. 20 years ago, it was like you go to a bar or something maybe, or to meet someone, or in the hope of meeting someone. And now it's like £7.50 for a drink in London. So you're less inclined to do that. And dating apps, yeah, I mean, there is kind of that reduction of what you like of chemistry into these like very specific characteristics. So it's kind of a catalogue of flesh on like Tinder or Hinge or something, where it doesn't I don't think actually attraction works like that. I think when you like someone or when you're attracted to someone, it can't always just be reduced to this set of kind of marketable characteristics like height or the shape of someone's jawline or bank balance, or what is it, like 6 foot 6 inches and 6 figures. Yeah, it can't. That isn't really how. Like when you like someone, when you have that chemistry, when you have that vibe or whatever, you don't necessarily always know why that is. It can't just be reduced to this like, oh, if I put these characteristics in, maybe if you want to buy a product, it is like that, but it's not like that with a partner. And I think so. You have people who don't fit you have men who don't fit the kind of the mainstream view of what's like attractive, the mainstream idea of what's attractive, who then will go on a dating app and maybe I was going to say then maybe they're not like photogenic, but maybe they just don't know how to present themselves in that way. Maybe they just don't know how to take a photo or something. And then it's like, well, I'm never going to be able to meet someone now. I don't fit these kind of, and it's not really like that. It's not actually like that. But they transpose that experience online to the real world and say that, well, this must be what people are like. They must be so superficial as this. When I think it's not really true, but it feeds the radicalization narrative.
And it cements the 80-20 rule as well, right? This is something that you mention in the book, how women get a lot more men interest than men do on these apps, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's there's that Chris Rock sketch where he's like, women go out and it's like, a woman goes on a dating app and it's like every few seconds it's like a guy is like, do you want some dick? Do you want some dick? It's like there's this like deluge of men. And there are more men on dating apps. And yeah, I mean, they don't always necessarily put their best foot forward on a dating app because the bar is very low in terms of approaching someone. And women can talk about that more than I can. But yeah, it's like if you're like when I was growing up, I could always protect my ego to some extent. Like, I didn't have a girlfriend. Well, maybe, if I wanted one, I could have one. If I just like approach someone, but I just don't want it right now. But whereas I think with not just dating apps, but Instagram as well, and it always feels like someone else is living a more fantastic life than you. Someone else is always having more sex than you, having a better life than you. And if you're at an age where you're forming your identity, and the barrier to uploading, profile on Tinder or something is low, but then you can get like 50 rejections in like 5 minutes or something. I mean, that would probably, I would have been hurt by that probably as well. And I think that's obviously that can be damaging at that time in your life.
Any more questions? Right there.
I wanted to ask, why do you think men are more likely to fall into these kind of groups or are more vulnerable to this kind of ideologies or...
Like where, do you say?
Why?
Why? Okay. Obviously, it varies person to person. I mean, for me, it was like, my dad was like I didn't have a dad growing up. My granddad died before I was born. Then again, it's like not that they necessarily be the best people to seek like dating advice from or something. I don't think that's always true. I think that can kind of be overstated. But I just for me, it was like a problem with social interaction. I just didn't know how to really, how to be sociable. I was very shy. I didn't know how much I'm neurodivergent. I didn't know how to approach socialization outside of like a problem-solving context. If that makes sense. So I think that made me like vulnerable to that stuff. Other people, it's like, I interviewed a guy in the book who his stepfather was very much like a kind of a bully towards him and treated him like, he was never masculine enough and he was was always kind of a wimp and he would call him a pussy and stuff and, he was just someone who was quite bookish and wasn't naturally like gravitating towards like rugby or something, and then he always grew up feeling like he wasn't enough, like he wasn't he wasn't performing masculinity how he was supposed to. I think that could be, and that doesn't necessarily have to come from like a close member of one's family. It can also just be from the culture generally. I mean, certainly when I was growing up, it felt like I had long hair as a teenager, and I remember like you'd have other men like berating you, like, you need to get a haircut, like because it's or like the people I hung around with like were into punk music and like being very expressive with their clothes and stuff, and they would be like picked on and like people would try and start a fight with them in our small town and stuff because it's like you're not performing masculinity properly. So it's like a societal thing. Yeah, and again, anyone can be kind of susceptible to that. There are certain vulnerabilities, but it's also there's also the masculinity influences create the insecurity within you as well. They make you feel like you're not enough, so they can present themselves as saviors and guides and sell you the cure to the disease they've kind of inflicted on you. So there's that as well. Like, there isn't a type that's going to be susceptible where someone else is going to be immune. I think there are always kind of we can all feel low, and we can all be made to feel low by those people who are trying to sell us the product.
I saw one more in the back. Yes.
Hi. Looking at language, what do you think is the reason that the messages of the Manosphere are so sticky? What makes them cut through in a way that, feminist language maybe doesn't to this audience?
I think sometimes it can be sticky because the Manosphere says to men who do feel they've had a loss, like working class men or lower middle class men, for example, who already feel like they've lost status to some extent, and that can be based on like deindustrialization, based on the kind of they have lost status relative to women, and I don't mean that's a good thing, like my mum's generation, women typically had less status than men, and that's less so now, and that's a good thing. But then they feel like they've lost status in the economy sometimes, and then these Manosphere entrepreneurs will then say, the reason you've lost status is because women and minorities are hoarding all the treasure, and that's why you don't feel like your life has turned out as you hoped it would. I think that can be, in the same way that right-wing populism taps into that message, I think, why is that sticky? I mean, partly because I think the left in general doesn't have a compelling story it's telling at the moment. I think certainly in the UK, it tends to be this very technocratic vision, this very technocratic language. I think since the left has lost confidence, I think the social democratic left, the socialist left has lost confidence since like the fall of the Berlin Wall, since kind of the failure of like command economics. It doesn't really, it adhered for a long time to this kind of liberal technocratic politics, and it doesn't really have that socialist vision anymore, that social democratic story of what we want to do with society. Whereas I think populists on the right don't really have that dilemma. They present a very simple message that actually things aren't as you hope they'd be because of these people, and we just need to do something about that, and then everything will be all right again. And it's much easier to make that case than it is to make a compelling narrative of solidarity, internationalism, and equality.
Thank you so much. I see a few hands raised, but unfortunately we do have to crack on. We're quite late, or lock in, as Jen said. But there will be more time, right, later for more conversation. Our next panel is the legitimization of extremism, aesthetics, politics, and power. Thank you again, James, for being with us today.
Thank you.
Really, I can recommend. This is a beautiful read. Thank you for taking the time to go through it with us.